Welcome to Film Witch, a podcast with me, Sandy Settle, practicing pagan witch and tarot reader for over a decade and a big fan of films. Here I talk about movies, their intersections with witchcraft and femininity, and whatever else I have on my mind, which is usually a lot. Blessed be. Come in and sit for a spell. And please rate and review me on Apple, follow me on YouTube and on Spotify, and share it with someone you think might enjoy it. It helps way more than you might realize, and it means everything to me. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider supporting me on Patreon, which is the best thing you can do to help this podcast continue. You can also find me on Instagram and on Letterboxd at FilmWitchPod. You can send kind words, suggestions, and business inquiries to filmwitchpod@gmail.com. From 1988, Tom Harley is a single father living somewhere in the South or Appalachia, more like a folktale combination of the two, raising his young son Billy on his own. Together they run a small grocery and feed store, but one day a group of dirt biking teens from the city stop by, and their reckless behavior and dangerous driving get Billy killed. In a rage, Henley goes to an old woman named Haggis, rumored to deal with black magic, who lives up on the mountain. She can't raise the dead, no sir, but she can raise other things, the likes of which you'll wish you never saw. With Henley's help, that is, the dead body he digs up for her, she conjures a demon named Pumpkinhead, whose purpose is singular and unrelenting, that of vengeance. So welcome, everybody, and I'm very happy this time around to welcome my first guest, who also happens to be my husband, David.
Hello.
Hi, babe. Hello. Thank you for being my first guest.
You're welcome.
You're the easy choice, so... But David used to do a podcast of his own called Under the First Floor.
Yep.
Where he would record local bands. Did you ever do any when you were still living in Tallahassee on that podcast?
No, that was all in Philadelphia.
Gotcha. Yeah, we both used to live in Philadelphia, and he is a musician, and he would record other musicians, and all of those episodes are still up, as far as I know.
They're on YouTube.
Yeah. So you can watch or listen to them, watch them, listen to them on YouTube. And some of the, I mean, I listened to some of them. I haven't listened to all of them, but some of the ones I've listened to are really awesome. And they're cool. They're like, it's kind of like lo-fi, right?
Yes.
Is that how you describe it?
It was, yeah.
Not like super professional or anything, but it's really cool.
On purpose.
Yeah.
Not professional on purpose.
Anyway.
Unlike this.
He also edits this podcast for me, and he is a really good editor. So thank you for doing all this work. And he also made the music. That is my intro and my outro, which I love and is perfect. So thank you, babe. Anyway, so did you want to, you kind of picked this film for this episode.
Kinda. I asked for a good Southern Gothic horror film.
Yeah. And I have a list of Southern Gothic films on my letterbox that I've had up there for years. And funny enough, I did not have this one on there because I kind of forgot that this one has like a faux Southern setting.
Yeah.
Not really like a realistic Southern setting. And they never like specify where exactly this is supposed to be set. It was shot in LA. So it's not shot in the South, and it's not really any like real South. Which is something I kind of remembered after we watched it again.
Okay.
Or rather, this is my second time watching this film. So I only remembered that this had like kind of a Southern setting, right? I remembered the swamp, like Haggis's swampy house. And I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. I love that. You know, I remember that was my thought
I was
the first time.
When we were watching it, I was like trying to pinpoint where it was from. And it starts off like really West Texas, like desert, mountainy Southern state. And then it goes to like real hillbilly mountain stuff. So I was like, oh, maybe it's like West Virginia. And then the witch comes and there's like Spanish moss everywhere and like swamps. And so I was like, oh, maybe like Louisiana or Florida. And I was like, this is just someone who had the South in mind and just threw together every possible geographic stereotype of the South, of all different Southern locations into one weird blend that, I don't know. As someone from the South, didn't really work for me, but you know.
Yeah, definitely probably not. Like I said, I didn't quite remember, you know, like where this was supposed to be set or if it was like supposed to be in the South, but It was on some other Southern Gothic lists that we were looking at when we were trying to come up with a good choice for the episode. So I think that's what kind of like made me end up picking it. But like you were saying, it's not really set in the real South. So I don't know if it ended up being as much of a Southern Gothic as we were trying to choose for this episode, but we decided to do it anyway, you know, because the film has a lot of merit, and it has good stuff.
Lance
in it.
played a great Southerner.
Oh yeah, definitely. I feel like I want to talk about Lance and his performance in this film a little bit as we get further on, because I have some notes about it, some stuff that I found out about his involvement in this film, right? But I think that that's a good point, because I think that he's a big part of what makes this film as good as it is, you know?
Yeah, especially in the first half.
Definitely.
The second half gets a little melodramatic. But I don't know if that's any of his fault or the notes from other people, but it gets a little heavy-handed towards the end. But the beginning, is played so light, you know? He does a great job setting that up and setting up his character. We'll talk about that more.
Yeah, it's like he gets more room to breathe in the first part of the film, right?
Yeah.
And like actually give a performance versus just like be a tool wielded by the script, as what happens later. A couple interesting things about this film. It's based on a poem by a guy named Ed Justin. I couldn't find a lot about him. I think he's, you know, a writer. I couldn't find like if he was like specifically a poet or what, but I did find something that said that he said he wanted to write something spooky for his kids when he wrote this poem. So I thought that was interesting. This is definitely not a film for kids, I would say.
No, definitely not.
But the original poem is apparently, you know, written with kids in mind. And I'm going to read it real quick. It's not super long. Keep away from Pumpkinhead unless you're tired of living. His enemies are mostly dead. He's mean and unforgiving. Laugh at him and you're undone. But in some dreadful fashion, vengeance he considers fun and plans it with a passion. Time will not erase or blot a plot that he has brewing. It's when you think that he's forgot, he'll conjure your undoing. Bolted doors and windows barred, guard dogs prowling in the yard, won't protect you in your bed. Nothing will from Pumpkinhead. And the kids, the Southern kids, like do part of this poem when they're like teasing.
Yeah. The dirtiest possible Southern kids.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, part of the poem that film is based on is actually featured in the film. It was originally titled "Vengeance the Demon." I think Pumpkinhead is a much better title.
Yeah.
Like I was said before, this was filmed in LA. I think you can tell that in the dusty scenes, right? That's like some.
I think that's why I thought it was like West Texas or something, because it was just LA, and that's pretty similar. Yeah,
it starts out feeling like that, right? It feels more like Texan, and then they're in the mountains, and then they're in a swamp up on the mountains, which is not a thing that exists, but they're literally doing like every aspect of like what you would consider Southern at some point in this film, as far as the landscape goes. In that way, I felt, this is just my feeling, that it was kind of folktale-y, right? In that it was like not based in reality, it was more like based in an idea. I know that you felt it was perhaps a little exploitive, right?
I would just say inaccurate. A lot of inaccuracies. It just seemed like some LA people trying to
who've never been
the
to the South.
Yeah. It didn't seem like purposeful enough to me to be like folkloric.
Yeah. I think they were, I think, you know, I just feel like maybe they were trying to go for something like that. But maybe we're not entirely successful in the end.
Yeah, maybe that's all it is.
So, as many people know, this film was directed by Stan Winston. This is the only film he ever directed. He directed some music videos, I think.
Oh yeah, Michael Jackson's longest video ever or something.
Ghost, I think it's called, or something.
Something like that.
He directed that, but yeah, this is the only feature film he ever directed. He is well known for doing all kinds of visual effects, specifically in films. Terminator, Jurassic Park. Some movies that I love a lot, honestly. He worked on Batman Returns. He worked on Constantine with Keanu Reeves, and he worked on Interview with the Vampire. Those are all movies that I really love. But yeah, and he worked on Aliens, developing the xenomorph to kind of like the way that we know it in the present.
Wait. So just the sequel Aliens or like all the Aliens?
Just the sequel
Oh, okay.
Aliens. He
Gotcha.
might have worked on, I didn't quite look up, he has quite a filmography when
Yeah, I
it
knew
comes to
that,
his
yeah.
effects work, right? So I didn't look beyond Aliens. He did not work on the first film. That was like
Okay.
Dan O'Bannon, and I
Geiger.
think, yeah, Geiger, and then I think another guy. But you can tell too, because I just rewatched Alien the other day on 4K, and like the xenomorph in that film is more like an idea. Like they've developed the head specifically, but the body is like a dude, and you can tell when you watch it. You know, it's probably the part of Alien, because Alien I think is like pretty much a perfect film. If you have a criticism of it, that's probably the only one I can come up with, is that like the xenomorph is obviously a dude in a suit in that film versus like later where the alien looks incredible, like the xenomorph queen in Aliens, you know, that's Stan Winston.
Gotcha.
So like that's the major difference, right, between like that first Alien movie and like the work that Stan Winston did on the xenomorphs going forward from there. And that's the xenomorph that we think about today, right? That's Stan Winston's work. So yeah, he, you know, is legendary. And Jurassic Park, like you watch that movie now and you're just like, how does this still look so good? This was made in 1983 or whatever. So that's Stan Winston. But he read the script for this and he decided he wanted to direct it, which is interesting to me because like why this over anything else, right? But it also meant that like he didn't get a chance to like really work on, I don't know if this was like his call, you know, it probably was to some extent because he felt like he didn't have time to do everything, right? But he didn't end up actually working on the effects for Pumpkinhead personally very much at all in this film because he was busy doing the directorial stuff. So the effects team for this, he had very little involvement with the design and gave kind of them the majority of creative control over, which is cool. I mean, being in like an effects guy, you would think, you know, it'd be hard for him to do that. It probably was to some extent, but
I kind of wish you would have taken more control over that.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, you wonder, right? Because like for my part, the creature looks awesome in this, but it's not the creature I would have made, right? And I'm like sure a lot of people are like, who cares what you would have made, Sandy? But like,
he doesn't look like what you would think when you hear the word Pumpkinhead.
And it's not what I would have chosen, right? Because like for me, like someone who's like super into Halloween, I love like vintage Halloween, you know, like creepy old vintage like Halloween pumpkins and stuff. And you think of like if anyone's ever seen Over the Garden Wall, they have a lot of vintage Halloween type ephemera is what I was thinking of. And that's the kind of like I love that like vibe of like Halloween-y stuff.
So, like,
and it's called Pumpkinhead, you know, like I'm like, oh man, like I know what I would have done, you know, and it's not this thing at all. A lot of people, like I've read some people have said that they felt that because he worked on Aliens prior to this, he was still thinking about the xenomorph a lot, or the team that he
seems like it.
the team he hired, perhaps,
That's
you know,
what
some
I
of them had
imagined,
also worked on Aliens. I found a quote from him that said the only real input he had was that he said he wanted something more organic than the creature having a pumpkin head. That was like a quote from him for this. So that's why they went with like this like goopy kind of like skin monster, you know, like
just make the head look more like a pumpkin though.
That's what I would have done, you know, like I don't know if that was like they wanted something like scary versus like kind of ooky spooky, but like I think if you're gonna take the name, then you need to go with it.
Yeah.
Right. And like some people are like, oh, he's called Pumpkinhead because he is buried in a pumpkin patch. But you look at the pumpkin patch that they made for the film, and it's like 2 little plastic pumpkins. Because the budget for this film was $3 million. I think adjusted for inflation, it's like $9 million today or something like that. It's not very much. Yeah. And they stayed on budget for the most part. Like Winston was really good at staying. I think it ended up being 3.5 at the end that they had spent on this film. So they had a really small budget, honestly. And I understand, right, that they can, but like throw some more pumpkins in that pumpkin patch or something. If you're really not going to go with, that's just, I know a lot of people love the design for the monster in this movie. Like, so I'm not, and it looks incredible. Like I'm not saying it doesn't look.
Kind of looks like a xenomorph that's orange.
Yeah, it looks like a xenomorph that like is just made of skin instead of like weird metallic Geiger stuff.
Yeah. I guess the budget is probably why the kills aren't too spectacular too.
I mean, I would assume so.
Yeah, because that was kind of a letdown as well.
But I do want to mention, Yes, I agree with you. I mean, it's not. There's like there's this part where he like the guy is trying to go on the dirt bike to get away, and then he like turns around and Pumpkinhead's like he, and he's like holding the chain for the bike, and you're just like.
So
Oh,
I fell asleep at one point in this movie, and I'm pretty sure I woke up right at that part, and could not figure out what was happening. But I was like, oh, they finally killed that guy. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Because it was like the main jerk.
That
right?
I don't think that. No, that guy wasn't.
Oh, okay. It was the yuppie guy or something.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. But
as I said, I fell asleep, so
it's okay. I mean, there's not a whole lot to that scene.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a super like important part of the film.
I just specifically remember waking up to Pumpkinhead holding the chain and being like, hey.
It's just like he's okay. So the vibe is that he ostensibly like knew how to like pull
he's a
the
mechanic.
right. Yeah, he's that Pumpkinhead is a mechanic. You know, and it's
Obviously.
like it's like
That's what he's learning when he's resting in the pumpkin patch. He's learning.
He has like
stuff.
a little mechanic textbook down there
Yeah.
that he's been studying for a while. So yeah, to your point that there's like
that's like the one slasher movie. Excuse me.
Yeah.
One slasher movie cliche that's actually in there is that they dismantle an automobile that they could use to get away. Like that's the only one, and it's the one that makes like the least amount of sense.
It's like it doesn't
like why wouldn't he just wreck the whole motorcycle?
Exactly.
He's Pumpkinhead.
Yeah, he would like tear it because he likes to tear people apart.
Yeah,
like
so tear
that's
the motorcycle
his
apart.
vibe. He's like, man, I just
This
want to
one
rip
thing
everything
he's
apart.
meticulous about though is motorcycle.
Yeah, they should have. They need to go back to the storyboard for that one.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to say that the film looks really, really good, especially when you consider the budget. And I think a lot of that has to do with like people on the film crew who don't get a lot of credit when it comes to the final product, which is just like people who do lighting and stuff like that. You know, people who do coloring and just stuff that's kind of like boring film stuff, but is like so important to like setting the mood in the film and making it feel rich, even if it has a really small budget like this film had.
Yeah.
And like I noticed this time around, like everything is orange. Like it feels super fall-y just because of the color palette more than anything else. Like the interiors of all the houses that they're like running into to get away from him. I said to you, I was like, it looks like the inside of a pumpkin. Like they're inside a pumpkin. And I thought that was really cool from a visual kind of fantasy standpoint, you know, just kind of like creating a pumpkin-y mood. I thought they did a really good job with that.
As much as I ragged on the imposter southern settings, on their own, they all looked really great. Like that swamp, the witch swamp looked incredible. And I thought the lighting on the inside was good. I did think that towards the end, all the Pumpkinhead stuff, they relied way too much on like strobe lights just to have action going.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was so overwhelming.
Yeah, not great to like watch those parts of it.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like they were using that to make up for the lack of actual action going on. So like that was the only thing that was like really making stuff intense, and I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the difference between like a creature, especially at this point in film, like that's all like kind of a practical effect versus like a slasher villain like Freddy or Jason, you know, where like there's just like a limitation in the scene as far as like how they can stage the kill and things like that.
Yeah.
Which, you know, the creature looks great, but like there's like you can, I think to your point, you can see that there's a limitation as far as like how interesting they can make the kill, because
it's probably a budget thing, you know, I assume.
Yeah.
I hope.
But they do some really cool stylistic stuff that I think helps make the film look better. Yeah. And it makes it more
It definitely
interesting.
saves it from being like a total just bad movie. Like it's definitely interesting to watch, and I didn't completely hate it. No, it was like
I asked you before we recorded this episode. I was like, "Did you hate this movie?"
Yeah.
You said no. You said there were good parts about it.
I really liked Lance's performance, like we talked about, and the whole setup in the beginning. I thought, sorry if I'm jumping ahead to points you're going to make later, but the way they set up his relationship to his son in like 10 minutes was something that the movie we watched before that was It Part 2. And they should have watched the first 10 minutes of this to learn how to develop a character.
Absolutely.
That was like immediately you knew exactly their relationship, and it gave weight to the kid's death, and I was just very impressed by that. I thought that was great.
Yeah, definitely.
And on the other hand, Part 2 took 3 hours to not develop any characters.
God.
Sorry to jump films.
For the record, I think that the first part of the contemporary It movies is really, really good, and the second part is just terrible. It's really quite sad.
Yes.
Anyway, that's for
just
that's
wanted
a
to throw a
discussion.
comparison out there.
That's a really good comparison, babe. Yeah, to your point about Lance Henriksen, who we also watched recently in Near Dark, and that's cool. I think as just like a spectrum of his ability as an actor, but he originally didn't want to do this film when he got the script. He thought it was just going to be like kind of like a dumb hokey horror movie. But he was reading the script, and he got to the part where after Billy's killed, he's like in his truck with his body, and he like sits up and he's like, "What did you do, Daddy?" And he's like, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He's like, "Okay, I'm going to do this movie now," because he thought that part was really good, and that part is really good. I wish
all
there
the
was
stuff
more.
with him and the kid in the beginning is like great.
I almost like, it's just me. It's not that I don't like the monster. I do. I think it's really well made and everything, but like, it's almost like they set this up in the beginning to be like a ghost story almost or something like that. And that I think feels more Southern Gothic than what they went with in the end.
Well, I saw that they were someone might be working on a remake of it.
Yeah.
And I could see this era of horror films, I could see them going for more of that
kind
of psychological horror.
Yeah.
But, this was slasher era, so I'm sure this was their limitation.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely meant to be a creature feature,
Yeah.
This is like a creature film, but I don't know. There's something about that dynamic between the two of them that was so well done and like just feels so strong for character work and everything that it's almost like the first half of the film feels like it's going to be something else. And then it becomes like a monster movie. So, and I think that's just because Lance Henriksen's a really good actor and the kid is really good, and they just clearly developed a rapport with each other. But, that scene where in the beginning, where he's like washing his hands and he's like, "My grandma used to wash my hands like this," and that is a real story. That was Lance's real grandma. And he's mentioned this in several interviews. Like he kind of put that in there because he wanted it to feel like their relationship was real, and like him interjecting like real stories from his own life just kind of helped them have a relationship with each other. Him and the little boy who plays Billy, and I just thought that was really nice.
Great. I forgot you haven't seen Millennium at all, right?
Millennium.
Yeah, it was Chris Carter's like series after X-Files with Lance as the main character. We need to watch that.
Oh,
sidebar.
Is it a spinoff of X-Files?
I don't think it was related at all, but it's a similar vibe, but like darker and more cult based. But he's like also an agent going after things. I remember it being good, but I don't know if it holds up at all. But I remember watching it as a kid, and it was like really spooky.
How come I've never heard of that?
I don't know, and that's what makes me think maybe it doesn't hold up. That no one talks about it, but I remember it being very cool.
Did it run for like just a couple of seasons or something?
2 or 3 seasons.
Oh, okay.
I think. Well, part of it was the series after X-Files, so everyone had high expectations.
Or they just wanted more X-Files.
Yeah, exactly. So it didn't succeed because of that, but we should find that.
Wow, now I'm interested.
That was my first introduction to Lance, and I always thought he was so imposing, but I never saw him in anything else until Near Dark.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this movie, and it was like
he's
so good.
I know everybody talks about Bill Paxton in Near Dark. I love him, don't get me wrong, but I love Lance in Near Dark. He's like my favorite part of that film.
Yeah, he's just got such like gravitas to him.
He's got a real like world weariness to him, and that movie is like kind of about like how depressing it would be to be a vampire. Like, upon revisiting it, it's kind of like dawned on me. I was like, oh, this film's about like how it would suck. Haha, pun, to be a vampire. But anyway, he's like a big part of I think that kind of like emotional weight in New York.
Definitely.
But he did like all this stuff for Pumpkinhead to help because the budget was so low. He would go out and help them find antiques for all the sets, like the store set, his little like Hurley's store. Like he found a bunch of the stuff that they used for that scene, and he would use his clothes, but like he would have them like let them out so they looked bigger and like baggier and more well used.
Yeah.
Like he wore them every day all the time. Like and then he had them make him like some fake teeth. So the teeth that he's like, so he would look more like just like a regular like Southern Joe guy.
Dang.
He did all this character work and stuff for this film, and I think
Sounds like a lot of what I liked from the film was his.
Yeah, he like put all this work into it, his character, to make it feel more real, and I just respect that so much. Like, especially like this movie is like it could have been just like Ghoulies or something, like just a really stupid like
Well, also
cash
like,
grab horror film, but like they have Stan Winston, directing, and then they bring in Lance and everything, and it just really elevates the whole thing.
Yeah,
because you can tell it was work done by people who like really gave a shit. Like,
yeah, definitely.
You were gonna say something?
Oh, I was just gonna make a dig at the rest of the cast, but we don't have to go into that because those teenagers were not the best performances.
I mean,
did you like them?
It's not that I liked them. It's that I felt like they were given at least kind of an arc that was interesting to me. That they were like given this like space to be fleshed out a little bit in the context of the script, because they're like really genuinely upset about what happens to Billy. Like. Other than like the guy who did it, who's kind of like, he's like, don't you dare call the police, but the rest of them are like really upset. And like that, I think, it just gives them like a little bit more weight than like a typical slasher. And that like, they clearly have like a lot of real remorse and everything. And versus just like kind of like trying to get away with it, because I mean, I, for instance, I'm a huge Friday the 13th fan. And a lot of those movies are just like, trash, but like in such a fun way that they're really fun to rewatch. But like the characters are not fleshed out, they're not really given any like emotional weight or anything like that, to make them for you to sympathize with them, for you to relate to them. Like they're just kind of like paper, cutouts, and they're Jason fodder. But with this, like I said, I don't know. You can just tell that the people who worked on it, they were trying to do something a little more elevated, at least with the character work. And so their deaths are like a little bit more upsetting, I think, than some of the slashers. Only because like, another reason being that I mentioned to this to you while we were watching this film. I was like, this film's a really good argument for like not hanging out with douchebags, because even if you're not the douche, you're a douche by proximity, because you were like chilling with this person and you were like just letting it slide, and it's kind of an argument for that. I felt that like I felt for these other kids, because it was like they didn't do anything wrong, they hadn't done anything. They just happened to be hanging out with this guy who was an idiot, and that's what they did, you know. And that's kind of like, I don't know. I just was like thinking about it, and I was like, oh man, that sucks. But that's an argument for like making sure that you're like checking people that you're like spending time with. Yeah. So, I mean, it sent me into a whole like, philosophical line of thought. So, I mean, they were doing something, right?
Yeah. I think I've just meant more the performances though.
Yeah.
Like that guy who played the main bad guy that killed the kid. I don't know.
It's a very 80s performance
it is.
from him, I think.
Definitely is.
He was probably the one who was the weakest to me, just because he was like, I'm on probation, man. Like he was just like very callous about the whole thing. So,
but then randomly he's like, I keep messing stuff up. I'm gonna have a life turnaround now, and he just lets people free. And like, this is like that flipped on a dime. I thought that was gonna be his whole thing, the whole movie.
Yeah, the writing is like, it's like kind of all over the place in that way, right? There's some parts that like have a real emotional gravity to them, like when Billy dies, and like Lance Henriksen's whole performance in this is really stellar. But for the other stuff, it's kind of like hit or miss. Like,
it kind of just felt like he kind of imprisons his friends who are going to call the cops on him, basically. And it kind of felt like the writers were like, oh, but wait, if Pumpkinhead's going to kill these kids, they have to be outside. So we have to figure out a way for him to let them go. And so he was just like, you know what? I changed my mind. Y'all can be free now.
Yeah, that's just like a lazy plot device or something. So this movie, it was shot, and then it was produced by Dino De Laurentiis, who is very prolific, as I always think of like Clash of the Titans when I think of Dino De Laurentiis, like that early stuff that he was a big part of. But
I was thinking Remember the Titans. That's
he was
different.
produced no, like Clash of the Titans, like
that makes more sense. Yeah.
Harryhausen effects and stuff. But yeah, he was producing a lot of films all throughout the 80s. But unfortunately, this was the point where his company was going bankrupt. So they shot the film in 87, but it was shelved for like an entire year because of this like kind of like funding issue that they were having. So when it was released, and I think this is a big part of why it didn't do super well at the box office, I think it only made like 4.5 million or something. So it like recouped its budget, but like only barely. And the reason for that, I think, is because they didn't have a lot of money, at least not as much as they were going to have originally to like do any marketing for it and that kind of thing. Also, Dino De Laurentiis' company was releasing Child's Play right around the same time, and they felt like Child's Play was going to be the hit, which
it was.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe if this film had had more marketing push or whatever, it would have also done better. But yeah, they went with Child's Play as far as the one they were going to funnel money into and everything. So this movie got kind of forgotten about for a long time, and now it's definitely a cult film. I would say
there was a sequel, right?
There were 3 sequels to this film, none of which I have seen.
One was like direct to TV, I think I saw, or a TV movie rather.
Yeah, at least one. Yeah, I think all of them.
Maybe all of them.
I think
maybe
all
like
of them.
direct to video and then a TV one.
Yeah, direct to video, right? Because this was the day of that. So if anyone listening has seen those films, maybe drop me a comment and let me know if they're worth watching, because I was looking them up. I was looking up the casts. Doug Bradley is in the third one. He plays Pinhead in Hellraiser.
Oh, cool.
So he shows up in one of them. And Lance is not in the second one, but he's in the third one and the fourth one.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I thought that was interesting. I was like, maybe I'd be more into watching one of those ones, those later ones. But yeah, I don't know. Let us know if they're any good and if they're worth watching, because there's a lot of movies in the world, and I'm trying not to watch trash that I hate these days. Chapter 2, I'm looking at you. 3 hours of my life. Can't get him back.
Yep.
Okay. So also more stuff about Dino De Laurentiis. He was apparently unhappy with the final cut of this film, and he forced a recut. And then when the filmmakers and all the people who had worked on it saw the cut that his people had done, they had like butchered the film and had cut out a bunch of the stuff that they really loved. So I heard this story that apparently they had to literally go in the trash and find a bunch of the cuts, because this was the days of like the cuts being like literal film stock that they were snipping out. So they had to go into the trash and get a bunch of the stuff that they loved that they had thrown into the trash. This was just like mortifying to me that this is like what people have to go through, or had to go through. I'm sure people have to go through it still in a different way. But they saved a lot of the stuff that they had thrown out. And so that's the film that we eventually got, was like them like saving a lot of the stuff they loved and recutting it.
Gotcha.
But I heard that about 5 to 10% of the stuff that was cut out that they loved is lost forever. So there's probably a whole another 15 minutes of this movie that was supposed to be in the original cut. And so, yeah. It's kind of it's almost a lost film, because there's a big chunk of it apparently that is lost. So that's sad.
Yeah.
So we went into this watch hoping to watch a Southern Gothic film. I don't think ultimately it's a strong Southern Gothic film. I think it is kinda. But I thought that there's just like a lot of interesting thematic stuff in this film that I just wanted to talk about a little bit more with you. And get your thoughts on it. Specifically, like you being from the South, right? I feel like there's like an eye that you watch films like this with that I don't, for instance, because I was born and raised in Pennsylvania. So I feel like saying, my ideas about the South sometimes are akin to like this movie, in that it's like this amalgamation of like something deserty, but also a swamp, and then like some mountain area with like hillbillies, and it's like not super strong or fleshed out sometimes, and I think the people who made this film are in the same boat. So, I did keep getting this personal feeling of it being like more of like a folk horror sometimes than it is a Southern Gothic. And then Another thought I had is that it's kind of like in that general like rural revenge genre of like cannibal horror movies or like
Mhm.
like that just like the general idea of like, oh, you go into a place that you're not familiar with and you start acting like an asshole and then you get your comeuppance kind of
Mhm.
thing, because like in the beginning, like they're not a lot of the teens aren't necessarily assholes, but they're just kind of like looking at everything like it's a novelty.
Mhm.
It is exaggerated though. I mean, I know
Mhm.
you had your thoughts about like kind of it not being accurate
Yeah. I
because like
mean,
the kids are so dirty, for instance,
yeah, it seemed like they watched Deliverance and like,
and they're like, yeah, and they're like taking pictures of them. So I
yeah, like,
understand.
oh, these
I kind of
hillbillies
understand.
have never seen a camera before. It's like, come on.
And so I kind of understand what they were going for, but it does feel
Mhm.
exaggerated
Yeah,
in
like
that way.
just the most dirty kids you've ever seen. Like, come on. Like I grew up in North Florida, which is like really the South, like Southern Alabama, basically.
Yeah, like Alabama.
And I've been in the sticks, and I've been around some real. I guess they wouldn't be hillbillies, rednecks. That's
Yeah.
what they were. My
Hmm.
dad was. My family was. Uh, Even in like the most backwoods place, they're not that dirty. Come on. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
You're like, they don't roll around in dirt all day.
yeah, there's like people looking at pictures of the Depression or something like that, and they're
Yeah.
like, oh, they're poor. Southern people are poor, so
Hmm.
that's what they look like,
It's
and
like
they've
that.
never seen a camera before, even though they're driving trucks and cars, and I don't know.
Yeah, no, totally.
Uh, they did I did appreciate that they weren't like completely stereotyping them as like just completely small minded, and
Yeah.
it was cool that they like there was a witch and they like acknowledged it. They weren't just like
That there was like a
not totally shitting on the occult or anything like that, but like they were like accepting of it. That was a cool like folkloric
oh
thing,
yeah, yeah,
part of it.
totally. Like there being like an accepted like old woman who does
Yeah.
like folk magic and
Uh-huh.
rituals out in the woods and stuff, and that
Yeah.
being like less like an evil thing and more just like a thing that is
Hmm.
part of the community.
Yeah.
I like that about it because like there's a rich kind of folk magic tradition here in Pennsylvania as well, from like the Pennsylvania Dutch and everything. And I always think that's a really interesting part of the folklore of Pennsylvania that some people who haven't been here and haven't spent time here maybe don't know a lot about.
Mhm.
I like films that have kind of like a natural folkloric aspect to them, that it's part of like the understanding of the community or of the culture of the landscape. So I like that about this. But I wanted to talk about the witch a little bit in this film too, because
That was one of the other parts I really liked. They did a really good job with that.
yeah, I mean it's kind of like implied that she's evil, right, in some way, or that she is
She
doing
just knows the dark
black
arts.
magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, like she dabbles in the dark arts specifically, right? Like
Yeah.
because there's this like scene early on where he goes to that hillbilly guy's house that he is delivering the feed to, and he's like, you got to tell me, like, I heard this lady, lives around here and she'll help people who are having problems. And he's like, no, I'm not going to tell you anything about that. And like, it's like understood that she's just like bad news kind of, but it's like not in a way that they're like going to go like burn her house down or something. It's more like, don't mess with her because she's like, she'll fuck you up,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, like that's the vibe. So, I thought that was interesting because it's just like an interesting approach to like a witchy person in your proximity.
Yeah.
But I'm sure some people have beef with like the portrayal of her as being like evil or like bad in some way, because she's never really. For my part, maybe I wish that she was fleshed out a little bit more as far
Yeah.
as like just, I don't know, giving us like a little bit more about who she is or like what she does or like anything like that. I also understand that can be a slippery slope as far as like just making it goofy,
Yeah.
and I do, I respect the ambiguity a lot. So I don't know if that was like a decision of, Winston in the end to kind of just like make her more mysterious. But yeah, I'm happy with the witch stuff in this. It was one of the aspects of it that I remembered the most actually from the first time I watched it, probably even more than like the monster or anything. I just remember I liked the witch stuff in this because it felt like folklore and
Yeah.
it just had a very like fairy tale aspect to it, almost like the inside of her her hut and like the swamp that's around it, even though it's mentioned that she lives up on the mountain, right?
Yeah.
There's like a giant swamp around her house, and so it's just like this unreality of it, you know, almost.
I think they were kind of like melding in like Louisiana, like voodoo or something in the Virginia hillbilly, and it's like totally those don't.
Yeah,
those are two very separate things.
Appalachian, folk
you
magic
could
is very
definitely tell they
different
were trying to do that.
Yeah. You can see that there's just like not a clear understanding of the delineation between different types of practitioners and things like that. You know, like
or just
they're
different
just like
parts of the South.
or like just like Southern like root work and you know like craft stuff that like is totally different and like totally unique to like different areas of the country and different areas of the South. That being like people you know from LA, they just don't like it all was one thing. I mean, give credit where it's due. This is pre-internet too, so they can't even like
Fair.
go online and be like, "What's this?"
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know. I'm giving them probably more credit.
Research.
Yeah, definitely.
I've got
You're like, what, Sandy? There wasn't books?
Yeah, I was about to say, I've got all those occult books from the 70s and 60s. Like, people were doing research on that. They should have known better.
Yeah. To me, it's almost like they were focusing more on like the monster movie aspect.
Yeah.
So this other stuff fell by the wayside a little bit. But as I mean, you know, I'm always going to approach it from the practitioner's point of view.
Yeah.
So that's something that I like, you know, if the inaccuracies of a Southern landscape is bothering you, then the inaccuracies of different types of practitioners is bothering me, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, that has nothing to do with that, you know, or whatever. So yeah, she wouldn't be doing any voodoo. Mm-hmm. She's a white lady.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was,
So that's worth noting, I think, you know. I wouldn't say it's being racist as much as it's just being like racially inaccurate, racially insensitive, something like that.
Just not having much representation of.
There's no black people in this movie
people.
Also. So that's where, you know.
Which would, again, Virginia hillbillies, sure.
Right. But then there's swamps. Yeah. So it's like, are we in the South or not? Because I think that's definitely
like a voodoo thing.
I think that's definitely worth bringing up as far as like the appropriation of, you know, voodoo and stuff. So just worth mentioning. But okay. So that's an interesting point to bring. I just want to say really briefly that I would love to see more like actual like Southern Gothic that made by black folks, because that I think is something that we need more of in the horror landscape.
I kind of thought like Daughters of the Dust it wasn't Gothic per se, but it had that kind of like feel to it of like that's the kind of stuff I want to see, you know? Yeah,
definitely. Like you know the magic arts, I would say, is part of that film as because it's part of the culture.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, something like that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe like we can get like Jordan Peele to like produce a movie that somebody makes like that or something. You know, like somebody who has. Or
maybe there's some out there that we just don't know about.
Maybe I've still never seen Eve's Bayou, and I really want to watch that. A lot of people say that movie is really good. It was made in the 90s, so I'm sure it has some inaccuracies or some inconsistencies or something.
It'd be worth watching though.
Yeah, maybe
so is Daughters of the Dust.
Maybe when I have you on again, we can do Eve's Bayou, because I know we should still try to find like a more legitimate Southern Gothic film to do, since that was your original idea.
I feel like most of the legitimate Southern Gothic movies aren't straight up horror movies. Yeah. And because it's October, we're like, we got to make it a horror movie.
That's why I chose, that's why when we were looking at those, I was like, oh, let's do Pumpkinhead, because I know that's kind of like Southern-y, but it had been a while since the last time I had watched this. So I feel like I remembered it a little differently than it actually is.
This was before you married to a Southern guy.
It's true. I would say my ideas about what makes something Southern they're different now and more well formed that I'm married to you.
Nice.
than they were prior, but you're still the authority when it comes to that. There is all I could find. Okay, so I couldn't find anything about this apparent reboot. The last information about it came out in 2021, so that was
I straight up only saw like a note on Reddit, or not Reddit, Wikipedia.
I'm not against a reboot of this one. It's not like, you know, super excellent on its own. So maybe if they got a good cast and a good director and stuff, and if they actually made a Pumpkinhead with a head that's a pumpkin, that's just my 2 cents on that. I don't know.
Did you have any thoughts on the score?
Not
Because
really.
as a music nerd, I looked that up.
I know that the guy who was the composer, he composed music for like a lot of cartoons. Or
Yeah,
something?
he did like the Animaniacs theme, like
Oh,
the
wow.
Freakazoid theme. He was like a huge composer in the 90s, and he did a bunch of Hughes movies. He
What's
did
his
Ferris
name?
Bueller's Day Off.
What?
It's something Stone, and I keep thinking Roger Stone right now, and that's not right. I was hoping maybe you had it in the notes. But yeah, he did like every 90s cartoon that you could remember watching for WB, like a huge part of my youth. And then he also did Pumpkinhead and Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Richard Stone?
Richard Stone. That was
Sorry,
close.
I meant to put it in my notes and I forgot.
I just wanted to give that a shout out because I couldn't believe that
Yeah,
guy.
that's all I remember when I was doing research was that he was the composer for cartoons.
Yeah,
and
but
Animaniacs
specifically
is the big one.
Animaniacs, Tiny Toons,
And he did Ferris
Freakazoid.
Bueller's Day Off.
Yeah,
but he did this movie. Did
I
he?
think he did a few Hughes movies in the 80s.
How interesting. What
Yeah.
an interesting oeuvre.
I know.
That's quite eclectic.
Agreed.
I can't say that
But yeah, I didn't think the score was like great.
I wasn't paying a lot of attention to it. Like, it was one of the scores that like, it wasn't leaving an impression on me.
Yeah, it
you
was
know,
very
like,
in the background.
Yeah. I think the character stuff was really compelling to me in this movie in the beginning, like Lance and his little boy and everything. That
Yeah.
was really hitting me hard. We have a child and who is a toddler, right? She's 1.5. And I think this movie hits a little different when you have a kid, I have to say. Because the last time I watched it, I was a single. Well, I was not married with a child, I'll put it that way. So, yeah, I remember just this time it was hitting me really hard, you know.
Yeah, that was very touching, and
It was hurting me.
they did it really well, you know.
That
so
scene where his son like dies in his arms, I was
Yeah.
like, oh man, like it was
that's heavy.
it was
Yeah,
hurting me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff with little kids now in horror films, like I have like a real strong threshold. I feel like that didn't used to be there, where like there's certain stuff that I just like, I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna watch that. Like,
Yeah.
like stuff I used to watch, you know, because like I didn't have a kid, I didn't have that like personal kind of like connection to that stuff. But yeah, I've heard this from other people too, who are like horror fans who have had kids, you know, where they're just like, yeah, my cutoff's in a different place than it used to be. There's just certain things I can't watch now, you know, and I definitely feel like that's me. So I would say that this was okay. It was kind of on the line of where I'm willing to watch stuff that involves kids in horror now, you know, like because like a kid dies in this movie, so like
Yeah,
for
like,
me
straight away.
Yeah,
And they set it up where like you kind of like, oh, this kid is really cute, and like he's very endearing to start with.
Yeah, it almost felt Kingian, Stephen
Well,
Kingian.
I was gonna
to me
say in
that way.
part 2, few kids are killed. I didn't really have the connection to them though. Like it just seemed like random
in
deaths.
part
you know?
two. Yeah.
And like this one, they really set up the kid
Yeah,
well in
that's
like
a really
10
good
minutes.
point.
Like
Yeah.
I was the beginning of this movie is just really well done character work.
It really is. Yeah, I think Lance has a lot to do with that.
Probably.
No, I agree with you about this being a good kind of juxtaposition between It Chapter 2 and Pumpkinhead as far as like the kid and character work goes.
Yeah.
You don't have to do a lot to make us care, but you do have to do something.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's maybe like the point that you need to be left with. There
Well,
has
I
to
thought
be
it was
something real and tangible that's grounding you.
It was especially striking because I think the stereotype thing to do in that movie would be have Lance be like a Southern dad who's like very like no nonsense and like just like, you know, kind of abusing his kid or something like that. But they set it up to where he's had a really loving connection to the kid and like, you know, like on a really personal level. And I thought they did that really well. And that was something I was very happy about to see as far as like
Yeah, I think maybe that's why
Southern
like
dad representation.
definitely. I think that's maybe why like the teens like they don't look as strong next to that character work that's being done in the beginning. So it just feels kind of like it's a little like jarring, you know. It's almost like Lance and his little boy are like in a better movie. It's sometimes, you know, like, and then we're like kind of put back in like a cheesy slasher movie sometimes. And like, there's like these things about the film that are so elevated, like the creature work and like, you know, like Lance's performance and everything. But then there's also aspects of it that are like pretty cheesy.
And
so
the idea behind
it's all
like,
over the place.
his vengeance being tied to Pumpkinhead and like him having to like kill himself at the end to kill off Pumpkinhead. Like that's a really interesting
Definitely
part of the story. And I think it's something that could really be played up in a reboot if they ever decide to do that for the psychological horror of it.
Hopefully they, they'll get people, if they end up doing that, that they'll get people on board who understand that that's like the compelling part of the story, right?
Yeah.
And like they don't do like a CGI pumpkin head, like all the scares in it chapter 2 are CGI for some reason compared to the first part, which Stan Winston worked on, by the way.
Oh, I didn't know
Part
that.
1, yeah. I don't think he had really anything to do with part 2, to be honest, because I mean, anything that he worked on is really copied from part 1, like the leper, like Javier Botet, like performing the leper and stuff, like that. That's very Stan Winston-y because it's all like practical effects and everything. But yeah, anything like that in chapter 2 is like from chapter 1. But that's why you need a. That's why like even if this is not the design for the monster that I would have chosen for Pumpkinhead, I still think it's really good because it's all like practical. Any of the shots I noticed when I was kind of like watching the end, and those shots where they zoom out and you see the whole thing, like the whole effect, like the whole creature that they created. It looks really crazy. Like it looks cool. Like it looks good. Like you can tell that they didn't really have like a lot of movement for the creature. It's like not like able to walk around and stuff. But like what you do see is like they just put a lot of work into it.
Yeah.
So that's neat. So babe, what in the end would you say that this is a film that you would recommend, or what do you think?
I don't know. Probably not.
Yeah.
Like I said, there were things I actually did like about it, and Lance's performance is great. But as a movie as a whole, if you're looking to throw on like a horror slasher film, it just wasn't very effective at that part of it from the slasher films. I'm not like some slasher aficionado like Sandy here. I've just seen what she showed me.
I do like my slashers. I'm just a huge Friday the 13th fan more than anything else. Like I like other slasher movies. Like I'm not one of those people who's like Scream's my favorite thing in the whole world, which I know some people are. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Scream. Yeah, those movies are really good.
This just felt like a cool setup for a psychological horror film that then the studio is like, oh, but it's got to be a slasher film because that's what's in. So they just threw some random slashers really stuff, but the deaths just aren't as good either. So,
but I think if you ask me, like thematically, I think this has some meatiness to it, which maybe is not fully explored the way it could have been. But I think Lance in particular is definitely tapping into something that's really great. So maybe it's worth watching. I think you probably would agree with this. It's worth watching for his performance.
Yeah.
And for some cool creature stuff.
Yeah.
And some cool coloring.
If you haven't seen it
looking scenes.
You want to see Lance perform something really cool, watch Near Dark.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Honestly, better. I feel like you probably can't go wrong with him, like
probably. I haven't seen a lot of his stuff, but
it makes watching this made me want to watching Near Dark recently and then watching this made me want to explore his work more honestly because I think he's really great.
Yeah.
So Thanks for coming on, babe.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for being my first guest.
Yeah, really appreciate I'll come downstairs anytime.
This is your new beneath the first floor. What was
under the second floor?
Now it's under the first floor. Now it's under the second floor. So at the end here, I'm gonna do what I always do, which is share a spell with y'all that has something to do with the film. This is a really simple one, really easy to do, and it's for the useful application of anger. This film explores kind of like the anger that comes along with grief, which can sometimes turn into revenge or vengeance. And that is an emotion that is not useful or helpful or healing in any way. And I think this film, in a slightly cheesy way, definitely explores that a little bit. Definitely Lance is functioning on that level as far as like his performance tapping into that kind of energy and meditating on that. I think he's definitely aware of the gravitas of that, even if the rest of the film isn't. So you can get a carnelian stone, or you can just use a rose quartz. Rose quartz is a lot easier to find sometimes, but if you have a carnelian or if you want to get one, they're really beautiful red stones. I actually bought one for David when we were dating. That we have somewhere around here in this room that we're recording in, I think. He keeps it up on top of the speakers in our recording area. And I got it for him when we were dating because it means passion. It's probably its strongest attribute. So that can apply to passion for many things. It can also apply to love, which is why I gave it to him. But I think that passion and anger are in many ways very closely related. So I think this is kind of a good stone to choose if you're trying to turn your anger into something a little bit more useful. And same deal with rose quartz. Rose quartz also deals with love and passion. So both good stones for this spell. And that's all you really need for this one. So hold the stone in your hands. You can let it warm up for a little while. I think that's always a good thing to do to kind of like get the energy of the stone in balance with however you're feeling and what you're trying to do with it. So you can begin to turn it in your hand clockwise. Turn it 3 times. And then when you're done, turn it 3 times counterclockwise in your hands. As you're turning it, you can say a little spell that I wrote here. Let my anger be lifted from me to be used for passion, compassion, and empathy. 3 times 3, so mote it be. And you can say this as you're turning the stone 3 times. So say it 3 times when you're turning clockwise. Say it 3 times when you're turning counterclockwise. And you can continue to do this as many times as you feel like you need to in groups of 3. I would do it until you start to feel calmer. So this is a really good spell when you're feeling really upset about something or really angry specifically about something. This is a really good spell for that, feeling specifically. While you're doing it, as you're getting, if you have gotten to the point where you feel like you're remembering the spell, you can also try to visualize. Suggestions for things you could visualize: doing something kind for someone, working on something you feel passionate about, or just meditating on someone you love, and think of all the things that you love about them. And this is just a good all the time spell. We live in tumultuous times, and a lot of things are really heartbreaking these days, more than ever. Sometimes it seems like so. But the desire to enact harm on someone who has harmed us never heals the wound, rather perpetuates and exacerbates it. Only our acceptance of grief and a will to move forward will heal us with time. And that's kind of probably the most serious thing you can get out of this film. So on that note, as above, so below, and peace out until next time. This podcast is produced by David Settle. He also made the music.